Part 1. You will hear a conversation between an organizer of a camping trip and a man asking for information. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Hi, this is Roberta. Who may I ask is calling?
Hey there, Roberta. Joan Roberts gave me your number. I'm calling about the, camping trip at the lake. Big Bear, is it? Oh, my name's Colin, by the way.
Colin, yes. Joan said you'd be calling. You and your son are coming along, right?
Yes, Peter and I are really interested, but I've got some questions for you, if you don't mind. Do you have a few minutes?
Of course, Colin.
For starters, what's the schedule like?
It's a short trip, a little less than 2 full days. On day 1, we'll all meet at the public library and set off at 6 a.m.
How long a drive is it to the campgrounds?
It's 1 hour exactly. So from 7 a.m. to 2 in the afternoon, we'll get everything set up. After that, we'll have lunch and review the schedule so that everyone knows what's going on. Once that's done, we'll head off to hike the grassland trails for about 3 hours. And from about 5 p.m. until lights out, we'll do a nice dinner for everyone, share stories, and teach everyone some campfire songs.
Sounds perfect. What about the second day?
Well, it's an early start that morning. Everyone should be ready to eat breakfast by 6. 7:30 to noon, we'll float on the Whitewater River. Lunch will be served at noon and we'll break down the camp starting at 1:30 p.m. After that's finished, we'll head back to town.
Any equipment we should bring along?
There'll be life vests for everyone, but the part of Whitewater we'll be floating is quite calm this time of year. As I'm sure Joan mentioned, everyone will need to bring a full set of camping gear. I've got a list here somewhere. Okay, each person should bring a tent, sleeping bag and pillow. For footwear, a pair of good, sturdy boots for hiking is best. Those can be worn for the rest of the trip too, but I'd bring along some old shoes for the floating trip. As far as clothes go, just the normal stuff will be fine. Jeans, some t-shirts, socks, that sort of thing. Remember also to bring some stuff in case of emergencies. Everyone will need a torch with extra batteries.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
A torch, huh? Unfortunately, ours just broke a couple of days ago. I'll run to the shop tomorrow to grab a new one.
No problem. Happens to everybody sooner or later. While you're there, you should probably buy some drinking water. 6 large bottles per person should be plenty.
Will the camping area have running water? Can't we just use that?
Yes, and it's a clean supply, but not always reliable. And you'll need to bring some along for the hike and float trip. Same goes for food. Although there'll be plenty to eat for everyone, I'd definitely recommend bringing along an emergency food supply. You won't regret it, I promise. I'd say 1 pack of whole grain snack bars. Also, please bring along a pack of matches and sharp folding knife. We'll go over basic knife safety and campfire making at some point during day 1. I forgot to mention that earlier, sorry.
It's fine. One of the main reasons Peter and I wanted to go on this trip was to learn some outdoor skills. Growing up in the city, I never learned any as a kid and think it's important to pass this kind of knowledge down to the next generation.
I couldn't agree more. It's easy to lose touch with nature, and so many people miss out on opportunities until they're simply too old to enjoy them anymore.
No time like the present, eh? Joan mentioned something about the fees. There's a deposit due pretty soon, and we should probably bring some cash with us, right?
That's right. Since we're going as a group, we get a special rate. The campsite fee's $20 and food's $50, which includes your meals and drinks. Remember, lunch and dinner are provided on the first day, and we're doing breakfast and lunch on day 2. The fees for hiking and floating are $5 and $20 respectively, so it's $95 altogether. We'll collect the fees in advance, and the first $50 is due 2 weeks before the trip. The remaining $45 will be collected before we leave from the library parking lot. Some folks have asked about refunds. Currently, there are no refunds just because we have out-of-pocket expenses for the bus rental, gas and food. If that changes, we'll let everyone know.
That is the end of part 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to part 2. Part 2.
You will hear a guide giving a talk to visitors at a history museum. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Arvington Open Air Museum. Before you enter, let me just give you a brief overview so that you understand the place and what can be found here. Construction on the museum started in 1974, with the aim of providing a place for local children to learn about the region's rich past and its cultural identity. It has since grown much larger and now helps to educate people of all ages on life during this unique medieval period of English history. This includes all its features, both pleasant and unpleasant. This is all thanks to generous contributions from the nearby Blemford University, as well as voluntary assistance from local residents. As you walk around the site, you will meet volunteer actors playing historical roles, as well as guides, students from Blemford University, who will talk you through what you see in greater detail. Their passion for history is what makes Arvington a truly unforgettable experience. Right, let me tell you a little bit about the inspiration for the museum. Just 2 miles east of this site, there used to be a market town known, surprisingly enough, as Arvington. This was located on the River Arving, approximately 2 miles east of this site, and became a successful trading town in the 13th and 14th centuries due to its location on a major trade route. The earliest records of the town actually go back a few centuries further. It's believed that people first built the town to cater for the nearby Clairvaux Abbey, which was built by monks in the 11th century. However, during the War of the Roses in 1467, the whole town was destroyed and never rebuilt. It is this original settlement that our museum hopes to recreate. Now, let me tell you a little about what you will find here. We have done our best to include all the features of the original town. It is very important to note, though, before you walk around the museum, that the original town was around 3 times bigger. The main difference is that at least half of the original town would have been houses, while our village contains only 10 homes in total, just to show you what they would look like. There are 75 buildings in a total area of 50 acres. We are not the largest in the country, admittedly, but we pride ourselves on showing what life was really like. English History magazine recently described us as the most accurate medieval museum in Britain. We have tried to use historical construction work where possible, brought from medieval buildings around the country, including parts of the town wall and church, although most of the work is completely new. Now, let's talk in more detail about what you can find here.
Before the talk continues, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 17 to 20.
Before you begin your walk around the museum, you may be interested to learn a little about specific things you can do here today. You can visit Arvington on 2 separate days and have completely different experiences thanks to a variety of talks, shows and activities we put on. Today, for example, we have an experienced blacksmith working with us who will show you how to make swords and horseshoes and even let you try yourself. Make your way down to the forge to see what you are capable of. If hitting metal things with other metal things doesn't interest you, how about heading down to the tailor's for a more gentle afternoon's activity? A team of volunteers will provide you with a detailed introduction to medieval clothing, complete with a range of examples that they've created. If you have a taste for medieval skirts and shirts, you can even buy clothing here. Those of you who are particularly interested in arts and handmade items have chosen the perfect time to visit us, as we're currently holding Crafts Week as a celebration of the outstanding craftsmanship and artistry of the medieval age. We have set up stalls showing the work of skilled craftsmen and women, from carpenters to jewellers, in the marketplace. You will be amazed by just how skilled these people were, and are. When you get to the marketplace, you may begin to find parts of the museum familiar. This is probably because several scenes from the popular historical drama series Sir Rufus the Ready were shot here at Arvington. In fact, the famous scene in which Sir Rufus met the Scottish king took place in the town hall at the far end of the marketplace. There are talks here every day about the local history of the area, including the aforementioned event at 2 o'clock. Now, to keep the children entertained, how about some more activities centred?
That is the end of part 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to part 3. Part 3.
You will hear a student called Jerry discussing a pedagogy course with his tutor. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 23. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 23.
Jerry, how did it go with preparing your lessons? Is there anything you would like to discuss?
Well, this is actually the first time that I have ever taught in an elementary classroom. After 8 years of learning pedagogy, I want to practice what I've learned in an instructive manner. But I'm a bit stuck right now. You know, the topic I want them to research is a bit hard for pupils. I'm afraid that they won't be able to handle it on their own. So I need new ideas on designing more effective teaching methods. Mr. Carter, do you have any suggestions?
Well, you should probably read this book called Professional Learning, written by J.K. Symonds. He is a professor who just transferred here last semester, but is already popular amongst the students for his creative teaching methods. There is an extensive range of learning approaches mentioned in the book, including approaches for team research, which might be helpful to you.
You mean dividing the students into groups to do research? I've never thought of this before. How does it work?
Professor Symonds has already demonstrated how efficient this approach can be. Basically, it aims to increase cooperation between students so they can present the results in a collaborative fashion. It helps them to develop their own voice and perspective.
I'll check out the book as soon as possible. It seems I can borrow some of the essential concepts and work them into my course design.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 24 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 24 to 30.
Well, I was thinking maybe I could use both observation and non-observation as a part of my teaching methodology. Could you take a look at my teaching plan?
Sure. What kind of observational methods do you have in mind?
For the observational part, I intend to include two approaches. First, the pupils can assess each other's behavior. I feel that reviewing fellow students through criteria-based reference evaluation allows constructive feedback. It can also improve their understanding of the subject material.
That's a smart move for a large class that would be hard to observe all by yourself. Also, you might want to get the feedback from several different individuals rather than just one. So how do you plan to carry out the peer assessments?
Oh, every pupil will be required to write a diary, which includes group projects, presentations, and in-class discussions. They'll put down their remarks. I'll collect them on a regular basis, which can also help me see whether they can keep up or not.
Good. What else do you intend to do?
Besides that, I also plan to do video recording. I've already purchased a camera, just in case I miss anything important. I can go back and review their performances anytime I want.
Would you record every in-class activity?
No, I'll just keep track of an in-class simulation, which would require every pupil to fully participate. Students will act as members of a city council meeting, discussing issues like whether or not prohibition should be instated in the United States.
This kind of teaching method is both inspiring and challenging. I can't wait to see how yours works out. Do send me a copy of the assessment afterwards, will you?
No problem.
So, what do you have in mind for the non-observational approaches?
Well, my plan is to quantify the statistics. Numbers do not lie. It is the most direct way to measure their performance. See how well they've learned.
Where does the data come from?
I'll evaluate the test results, including the midterm, final exam, and pop quizzes, which would only take up about 40% of the overall assessment.
Sounds like a lot of tests and assignments. Please remember that you don't want to wear out your students. Keeping them engaged is the key to efficient learning. Once they are exhausted, they just stop trying.
Oh, I haven't thought about that. You are right. I don't want to frighten them with tons of assignments and exams. I'll make note of that. Thanks for the advice.
I remember last time you mentioned questionnaires, right?
That's true, but it is not for my students. In fact, they have to design their own questionnaires and choose the respondents using the internet. As a complement of other teaching activities, it would deepen the creative learning process.
Is that all?
Oh, the pupils will have to conduct interviews of their own, and for this, they get to choose anyone they like, including relatives, friends, and acquaintances to answer the questions.
Seems to me that you have figured out most of your teaching methods, but you still need to polish some of the activity.
That is the end of part 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to Part 4. Part 4.
You're going to listen to a talk about tea in the UK.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
During the 1930s, there was a popular song which had the title "Everything Stops for Tea," and to millions of British people, a restful cuppa is still an ideal way to relax for a few minutes from the rigours of the day. The English custom of drinking tea has its roots in the 17th and 18th centuries. When first imported to Britain, the exotic cha, or cha, as the Chinese tea was variously called, was considered a man's drink to be enjoyed with colleagues at London coffee shops. These were popular meeting places for many walks of life: politicians, lawyers, poets, actors, and writers. Many London clubs began in this manner, and the famous Lloyd's Insurance underwriters started out as Lloyd's Coffee House. In 1706, the first coffee house that offered tea was Tom's Coffee House, owned by Thomas Twining. He realized that he needed to introduce an added attraction to compete with the many other coffee houses in London, and tea was rare, exotic, and extremely expensive. With these credentials, tea became an exclusive drink and enabled Twining to open a tea shop under the sign of the Golden Lion in the Strand. By the 18th century, the ladies of the more affluent classes were going China mad, using tea as an excuse for displaying their extravagant purchases of Chinese porcelain and Dresden tea sets. A comprehensive tea tray would consist of a teapot and stand, teacups and saucers, sugar bowl, milk jug, and basin for discarded tea and tea leaves. Tea was still expensive and kept in locked tea caddies. Skilled craftsmen fashioned caddies of carved inlaid woods fitted with crystal and precious metals. To ensure the servants weren't tempted by this priceless commodity, the caddy was kept locked, and only the mistress of the house held the key and prepared tea when guests came to visit. No well-brought-up young Englishwoman could consider herself socially acceptable unless she knew how to brew a proper cup of tea. As the 18th century progressed, changes in commerce and working hours resulted in the main meal of the day being taken much later in the evening. The prospect of lasting from breakfast until evening did not appeal to the Duchess of Bedford, who is usually credited with being the first to alleviate late afternoon hunger pangs by introducing a small 4 o'clock meal served with tea. With time, the light, wafer-thin toast or delicate white bread gave way to exotic fillings like tomato and egg, cucumber, chicken, or potted shrimps, followed by buttered scones, crumpets, or elegant pastries. The popularity of tea continued to spread, but it was not until 1839 that the first shipment of Assam Indian tea was landed in Britain. A healthy trade with India was soon established, and tea clippers, like the Cutty Sark, now a museum in a dry dock at Greenwich, were reaching the peak of their sailing days. In 1879, the first limited shipments of Ceylon tea began to arrive, and by 1880 this had been firmly established alongside Indian and China teas, giving the broad range of teas that are available today. There have been few changes in 3 centuries of tea trading. London is still the centre, and indeed Twinings still has a shop on the site of the original Tom's Coffee House at 216 The Strand. The name Twining has been linked with tea for over 280 years. Indeed, it was Richard Twining, in his capacity as chairman of the dealers of tea, who in 1784 persuaded Prime Minister William Pitt to reduce the high tax on tea, making the beverage more accessible to the general public.
That is the end of part 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers.